Here's a little update on my greens. They actually usually look better than this at this point, but that day that I let it get really way too hot in here, it killed a lot of them and stunted some of them. So I guess I could be bummed about that, but considering the topic of today's video, I feel like it's just another example of how this gardening year has gone. So today I wanted to kind of debrief the gardening year, just do kind of a little overview of how I felt like this year's garden went and kind of what I want to do differently for next year. Okay, let's move over here where we have a little better light. I get asked all the time, like, do you keep a gardening journal, or how do you make records of your garden? And I have a YouTube channel. That's really it. I also have like a really unusual memory for stuff like this. Whenever people ask me during garden tours, like, do you have a notebook we're not seeing, or what the deal is, I love it. I really do. And so I do have a large capacity for it in my mind, but also making videos really helps. I mean, it's easy for me to tell you what was planted in my garden this year and last year and the year before, because not only did I plant it and grow it there, I told you about it every week and then edited those videos. So there's a lot of repetition for memory there. And I like to make videos like this because I think it can help you in your process of reflection and decision making, as well as kind of getting over some failures, as well as kind of getting inspired for looking forward. And this also provides all of those things for me, as well as a record of that. So I've joked so far about how this year in the garden was the year of the do-over, how this entire gardening year I kind of just kept wanting to be like the 6-year-old that realizes that they're losing in the game and say, do over, let's just start it, the whole thing over again. So many of the things that I have done or attempted to do this year have honestly failed, and in part that had to do with being just a difficult year in conditions. We had a really weird spring, a really late start in the garden. We had an earlier frost than usual. Just across the board, we had a really unusual year. The winter, last winter, was very, very, very mild. So we had some pest issues in like March that usually don't start until May. So the whole year was riddled with failure. For me, it was also a year of a lot of adjustment, because this is obviously the first year that we've had so much through YouTube to keep up with. And then we lost Jeremiah's mom last fall. She was a huge help in the garden for me. So just the entire year it felt like the odds were just stacked for failure. I will not say that I regret how it went, because in every single gardening year, no matter if you succeed or fail, we get to harvest a crop of wisdom, and I definitely did get a lot of that this year. So let's talk about some things that I want to do differently next year than what I did this year. I definitely want to get some row covers in. That was something that we had hoped to do by this fall and we didn't, but we're definitely going to do that for spring. Being able to do a little bit of season extension, I think, will be really, really good. I live in Zone 7B in Central Arkansas, and so one of the issues that I deal with in my garden is that our spring and fall seasons are very short and sporadic. For instance, it can be like actual real winter where we're getting ice and snow in like February, or it could be really nice moderate temperatures. And so in the past, I always plant I plant brassicas and lettuces and peas in mid-February, and it's just very iffy on whether or not those are going to do well. Same thing in the fall. I always plant those for the fall, and like this year I didn't have them covered. It's usually not an issue, but then we had a really hard freeze, and most of them got wiped out. I think some of them will recover in the spring. I'm not going to pull them out, but I'm not going to be harvesting those things in the next few weeks like I had hoped I might. So row covers are definitely a priority for me. That's something that I really want to get in my garden, because that gives me a little bit of protection if we do have a really sporadic spring and fall like we did this year. Another thing is that year before last we did some in-ground gardening here where our glass greenhouse is now, and this year we did not put anything in the ground, and I'm really hoping to get this done. Now we're planning on doing like perennials and berry bushes, but I will probably intersperse that with some more vegetable area, and also I'm really hoping to get an in-ground garden in the back as well. Now I have all the garden beds. I loved my raised garden beds. I am a huge believer in raised garden beds, but just personally this is something that I want to do differently. I would really like to have more space in the ground to be able to grow some things like corn and rambling things like winter squashes, and even maybe being able to grow larger amounts of things like green beans. I love using my raised beds for peppers and for my tomatoes, of course, and I love the arched trellises for all kinds of things, but I'd really just like to use some in-ground space. That wasn't really like a fail this year, either of those things. They were just things that we didn't get around to, and I'm really hoping to put those on the top of the priority list next year. Now, something else that I'm planning on doing differently next year is actually, and I'm gonna say this, and you guys do not rake me over the coals if I end up fudging on this a little bit. But this year I started 85 varieties of heirloom tomatoes, and I liked a lot of the new ones, but my favorite varieties really stayed the same. Dr. Witchy's yellow, climbing triple crop, Black Beauty, Aunt Ruby's German green, Paul Robeson, Pink Berkeley tie-dye, large barred boar, Kellogg's breakfast. These are some of my tried and true tomato varieties that I've now grown for multiple years, and I love trying new things and finding new varieties, but I think I'm going to implement a little different approach next year on my tomatoes. Now my hope is that in doing in-ground gardening space, I might be able to squeak out one more bed dedicated for tomatoes in the raised garden beds, which I know that's giving a ton of space to tomatoes, but you guys know I love to grow them. I do can them and put them up so they don't go to waste. It's something that we really use a lot of, and my thought is that I might be able to move things like okra, which I've been growing in the raised garden beds, into the ground, because okra so thrives on neglected soil that here while I'm building soil in the ground, okra might be a really good thing to grow there, and I can grow a lot of it and make that space in the garden beds for more tomatoes. But this year I would really like to focus on planting more of the plants that I really like and less plants that I'm just trying. And so I think what I may do, and it's so hard for me to even say this because like I know myself and I know how starry-eyed I get looking at seed catalogs, and when you guys start saying, oh, you have to try this, it's the best in the world, I'm like, I believe you, and so I just try it. I think I would like to limit like new varieties to maybe like 10 or 15, and then grow more plants of varieties that I really know that I like. Another thing that I really want to do and that I haven't done in the past, I've grown lots and lots of slicers that I use kind of multi-purpose, because so many big heirloom slicers are so meaty, you really can process them well and they're fine. However, I grew a few varieties this year like Marglobe and Rutgers and Arkansas Traveler. There were varieties that grew very uniform, round, red tomatoes. And I'm thinking this next year I'm going to be much more intentional in planting maybe an entire bed of just tomatoes that are like that type, and pastes like Amish paste and pink ox hearts, the Italian heirloom, which I loved this year. Ones that I know are going to be great processors. And I'm gonna do just an entire bed of those, just so that I know that I have some really solid tomatoes that are going to be easy to process. Because one thing I will say for heirlooms, you can process those, but the way that they grow kind of, you know, unusual sometimes can make them a little more difficult in that process. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm still going to be looking at growing roughly maybe between 120 and 140 tomato plants next year, but I'm just going to make the proportions of that a little different. I'm going to give less space to trying new things, still going to try new things, still going to try quite a few new things, but more space and intentionality to what I'm planting. This year, some things that I liked that I did was that this year I did an entire row of cherry tomatoes. That was roughly 25 plants of cherry tomatoes, and I loved that we did that. This was my first year to ever grow that many. That's a lot of cherry tomatoes. But the reason why I loved that was, one, because we dehydrated a lot of those. That was something that we dehydrated so many cherry tomatoes. But the kids love picking them. A couple of my kids really love eating them. I love eating them. And it was kind of nice, because we do have people come and visit so often, to be able to always say, yeah, go pick yourself a bag of cherry tomatoes. So that, my reasons might not apply to other people, but I will definitely keep the whole row of cherry tomatoes. I wasn't sure if I was going to like that. I thought it might be overwhelming, but I actually really did like it. Something else I'm going to do differently next year, which this is gonna be quite different. So the very first year that I had my raised garden beds, and I actually don't have any footage to show you because before I did YouTube, I actually planted all of my peppers together in one bed. It was just a whole bed full of peppers with interspersed like marigolds. I think I had a little bit of companion planting going on, but almost all the peppers were together. That year I was so overrun with peppers that I didn't know what to do with them. I had so many peppers. Now the next year and every year since then, I've spaced them out. A few peppers here, a few peppers there, because I really do believe in diverse planting. And I still do. I still think that diverse planting is very valuable, and that overall that's the best way to go. However, I have really struggled in growing peppers over the last couple years, and one thing that you guys actually recommended to me was to grow my peppers close together, that they do well when they're grown close together. And just from my own experiential knowledge of the 1 year that I grew all the peppers together, that was absolutely the case. That was the best pepper year I've ever had. So next year I'm planning on planting all of my peppers in one bed, doing them all together. So that's definitely on the list to do differently next year, and we'll just see how it goes. Also, in seed starting. In the past, I've started all of my seeds on February the 15th, and that's tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, any flowers that I'm going to be starting outside. That's roughly 6 weeks before our last frost date. This year, I'm actually going to start my peppers earlier than that. I think I'm probably going to go more like 8 to 10 weeks for the peppers, because they have struggled so hard. And one thing that was suggested by you guys was to get them a little more established before putting them out, because the spring nights, although they're not freezing, they can be a little on the cool side. And so having those plants more established and maybe holding out on planting them out just a little bit longer seems to be something that might help. So that's what I'm going to do this year. That also gives me a reason to start seeds earlier, which I'm all about that. Speaking of starting seeds, last year I did start some brassicas, but I started them in my greenhouse where there wasn't a lot of additional heat that I could add or light that I could add. And so this year I'm hoping to do a pretty nice, you know, early spring garden, like the brassicas and all of that, that will be being harvested before our last frost date. So like I said, in the past, I've actually planted those out, even direct sowing things in February here in 7B, where usually our last frost date is like the end of March or the 1st of April. But this year I'm planning on just probably right after the holidays going ahead and starting a lot of that stuff in the house under grow lights, so that in February, probably the beginning of February, especially if we have those row covers going, I can go ahead and transplant all of those things out, and I can be harvesting a lot of those leafy greens and all of my brassicas and all of that in the end of March. And right as we're getting the summer garden in, we'll be getting like really nice harvests of that cool weather stuff. I really want to use my greenhouse a little bit more over like the early parts of winter, like after the holidays and into like January and February. And I don't know exactly how that's gonna work, if we're gonna put a heater out here, but if I am starting my winter stuff right after Christmas inside, I'm sure we'll be moving it out here in like January. But I'm really hoping that since I have this nice greenhouse that holds heat so well, to kind of create a space to really retreat to during those last couple of months of the winter, because that is whenever it really starts to wear on me that everything is brown and, you know, that the garden is not in service at that time. So I'm hoping to really use this space more. I used my greenhouse a pretty good bit last year, like towards the end of February and into March, but I'm hoping to be able to get out here a little bit before then. Now, one thing that's unusual for me, because we had that really, really hard freeze that came and it pretty much wiped out everything that's going on down here, I don't have a garden right now. I mean, I've got these puny lettuce greens growing that I've half killed in the greenhouse, and a few herbs that have held on, some garlic in the ground, but I don't have anything that needs regular tending really over the next few months. And you know, I'm gonna start seeds after the holidays, but so for the next like 6 weeks or so, I don't really have much of anything. And that is so bizarre for me. Like I'm a little bit at a loss, like what in the world does the gardener do without a garden? But I'm kind of like forcing myself to really embrace the season of rest so I can come back really refreshed. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to list on the things that I'm doing differently, but it's taking some real intentionality. Like it's really taking me telling myself, hey, everything gets a season and there's a reason why we have a season of resting. And so I'm really doing that. Of course, it's starting to build, like the desire to be in the garden is really starting to build. The first few weeks of realizing that I wasn't gonna have like a winter garden, I don't think, I mean, I just didn't even really know what to do. But I then realized how exhausted I was and how like much we had decided to do this year, that it was too much. And I don't know, it just kind of, it was almost like this screeching halt of brakes being hit. And now that I'm being like, okay, it's time to rest, I can feel like the restoration that rest is bringing. I can feel the fact that I'm feeling excited again, and coming down here and seeing everything dead, it's not making me feel really sad, it's making me feel really hopeful, and that's good. I think that really learning to embrace rest and enjoying the fact that we get a season to rest and plan, it's a really sweet thing. That's kind of like my overall thoughts about the garden this year. I don't think at the end of this year that I'm like evaluating how I garden or wanting to like make any massive changes of how I do things. I think overall I feel a little resolved to be a little more consistent next year. This year, with just being really busy, I'm kind of going back to the place of being like, I really need to prioritize this over other things. And consistency really, really is key on staying on top of a lot of things in the garden. And hopefully the circumstances next year will be a little bit easier. And this is my encouragement to you, and also that I have to remind myself, it's really not a failure. The main thing that we are doing this for is we get the joy of growing our own food, we get the joy of growing a garden, but truly we're growing so much in knowledge and wisdom. And the thing that I hold on to in the face of failure is that I'm thankful that right now that our life doesn't depend on this, that right now that we're really trying to grow our own food for our health and for our finances and for all of that stuff. But ultimately, if it fails, we're not going to starve. It's going to be okay. But I know that I'm learning, and being able to deal with very difficult circumstances and being able to deal with failure, sometimes those are the situations that teach you the most of all. So at the end of this year, I am thoroughly hoping for a do-over for next year, but I'm also really glad to have made it through this and said, okay, I know what I need to do differently. This is the things that I want to do, and now I'm going to rest and get ready to do them. So I hope you feel encouraged, and as you look back over your gardening year, really take note of the things that worked well for you. Take note of the things that did not work well for you. Be honest with yourself about the areas where you can grow in consistency and diligence. Look at the choices you're making, like the varieties you're growing, and see if that's serving your family well, or if you need to adjust those a little bit. And getting all of this information, I think, is a really good baseline before you step into the season of planning, before you go into seed catalog shopping, which we're going to be doing some of that here over the next couple weeks. I've got a trip up to Baker Creek planned. I'm going to take you guys with me and let you experience that through the lens of my camera. It's time to go into that, but I feel like we'll be better equipped for successful garden planning if first we do a little bit of reflecting on the last gardening year. So I encourage you to do that. Make a record of it, even if you just record a little video on your phone for yourself later. If you have a YouTube channel, put it up on their YouTube channel. Your reflections of the 2019 garden, or just make a video for yourself, write it down in a journal. Pictures, if you've got pictures of your gardening year, I encourage you to download those onto a file on your computer and put 2019 garden, because those are going to be great records for you to look back on. Instead of just having to flip through your phone, get them all in one place where you can really reflect and make a record of the work that you did this year. Even if you failed, those failures are valuable. So hang on to them and use them for all that they're worth in teaching you and equipping you for next year. So thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I'm looking forward to going into this season of rest and planning with you, and then of course another beautiful year of growing next year for 2020. Thank y'all, and bless you. Until next time.